Hi, this is Rick Frederick with the review of Agnew, Powell, and Snow 2006, an examination of the questioning styles of police officers and caregivers when interviewing children with intellectual disabilities. This actually quite interesting paper with a lot of work. So they looked at children with intellectual disabilities aged 9 to 13. And then they did a staged event in their classrooms 4 times. So somebody came and, showed them a koala bear, just did a lot of different things. And there were I think there were 17 different events that were tagged for questioning. Then they brought in police officers who had just been trained on questioning children. And then they later brought in caregivers, or arranged for caregivers to question the children. And the goal was simply to say, what happened at this event? So what they found is that police who had been trained in best practices just recently used best practices to use a lot of open-ended questions and so forth, but then did often interrupt and weren't very good at encouraging children to talk. The caregivers were very direct, leading and even coercive to try to get information out of the children, which was quite interesting. So, what are some principles that the authors base their design on? Is that children's language limitations might not be apparent until you put a child in an unfamiliar situation or engage in extended discourse. So, it might be that people tend to overestimate what they might know or how well they can express themselves if they talk about routine things. It's not until a novel situation. Another thing that children tend to do is to not be aware or to have a metacognition about their conversation. So an example of that would be that they might say he or she without using an antecedent. One of the problems that the author suggests might be true is that because parents have been trained or have tended to act in a direct way with their children, the children have not necessarily learned how to take responsibility for conversations in which they have a goal in mind or a strategy of interaction that others might have. Here's that point. So they have less opportunity to practice interactive styles and to monitor their interactions. And the authors cited some work that shows that police tend to underestimate the ability of individuals with intellectual disability to relate events. So they looked at 28 children with mild to moderate intellectual disabilities. The police officers had just completed a 3-week course on collecting evidence from children. The children had the 4 events. And then the interviewers were just said, look, there was this event, they called it a Deacon's event that occurred. We just want you to find out what happened. So the police had an advantage here, but and that might be useful for Table 5 that we're going to show in a second, but the police were closer to the events than the caregivers. The results of this study show that police tended to ask more questions as compared to caregivers. The proportion of their questions that were open-ended prompts was higher than that of caregivers. Both groups didn't provide much encouragers, but caregivers especially did not seem to encourage individuals with moderate disabilities. Table 5, children tended to give more information to the police. A confound here is, of course, that the police were closer to the events than were the caregivers. Some conclusions from the authors. Or observations. The police officers rarely reminded children of the topic. They didn't use much in the way of encouragers. Caregivers were less persistent than police officers, They're almost suggesting a rather cynical view of the caregivers. I don't know if they mean to do this, but here's what they say. We saw that they were very direct, they were controlling and coercive in their interviewing style, and this included criticizing the child, bribing the child, and just dismissing them out of hand. If child interviewers have limited experience in open-ended or child-centered forms of communication, they are unlikely to develop appropriate skills for eliciting evidence. That's true for the caregivers as well as for the police officers. Okay, nice little study. Thank you very much.